She broke into my hen house and took all the eggs, thinking she could sell them as her own. I thought that living in the country would keep me away from this kind of problem, but that's when life decided to prove me wrong. Because, of course, a creature like she had to materialize in my neighborhood. The woman was the pure juice of inconvenience, the supreme queen of the HOA, that damn neighborhood association that thinks it can dictate what kind of grass you plant in your yard. I never cared about that. After all, my property wasn't part of the HOA. But you know, some people don't take no for an answer. It all started when she saw my barn. My dear old red barn, full of happy chickens laying fresh free-range eggs every morning. It was my little piece of peace. It turned out that this woman wasn't satisfied with the fact that I sold my eggs to a few neighbors and loyal customers. According to her, everything produced in the community must be regulated by the HOA. The first time she showed up on my property, I thought I was lost. She came out of nowhere, walking around like she owned the place, pointing at everything and making notes on a clipboard. "Do you have permission to keep these birds here?" I laughed. Not a laugh of amusement, but the dry laugh of someone who already knows they're dealing with someone problematic. "It's my property. I do whatever I want with it." That was enough to awaken in her a personal mission to make my life hell. She started denouncing my farm as an environmental violation. She called in inspectors to check on unsanitary conditions, who, by the way, found nothing wrong. She complained to the other neighbors, trying to convince them that my roosters crowed too loudly in the morning. He even tried to argue that my chickens were a biological risk to the neighborhood. But the pinnacle of badassery was yet to come. One morning, I went out to do some shopping in town and came back a few hours later. Something seemed off. The gate to my barn was ajar. My dogs were agitated, barking as if they were seeing the devil himself. That's when I heard the screams. Inside, in the middle of my chicken coop, was she, with a sack in her hand, already full of eggs, and a look of pure panic on her face. But it wasn't because of me. What was terrifying that woman were my roosters. 5 of them, all of them furious, all ready to defend their territory, with nails, beaks, and spurs. Well, I just crossed my arms and watched the show. What happened next was the most glorious scene my eyes had ever witnessed. There she was, stuck in the middle of my hen house, holding a bag of stolen free-range eggs, and surrounded by 5 of the most temperamental roosters that ever lived. And they were no ordinary roosters. Oh no, my friend, they were roosters raised on corn, sunshine, and pure hatred of anyone who dared to step on their toes. They weren't just birds. They were feathered little devils with the instincts of Roman gladiators. The woman tried to take a step back, but Rodrigo, the leader of the flock, wasn't about to mess around. He flapped his wings, let out a deafening war cry, and lunged forward. She let out a desperate squeal, raising her arms as if she were being attacked by a horde of wolves. But this only made matters worse. The roosters saw this as a direct challenge. The sacred code of the farm had been violated. And that's when the trouble really started. Rodrigo jumped straight into her hair. Yes, in the hair. And it wasn't just a simple peck. No, he latched onto it like a hurricane of feathers and started pecking at it as if he were trying to open a dried coconut. The woman went into pure desperation mode. She screamed, whirled around, shook her head, but there was no way Rodrigo would let go. The scene was unbelievable. But Rodrigo was not alone in this fight for the honor of the hen house. While she was struggling, the other roosters also entered the fray. Chico, the most vindictive, decided to attack her legs. He jumped and pecked at her ankle like a true ninja with spurs. Pachoca, for his part, took it upon himself to rip open the bag of eggs the woman was holding. In a master stroke, he threw himself against her arm, causing the bag to fly through the air. And the eggs? Ah, the eggs. They fell back to the floor of the hen house, shattering in an explosion of yolk and white everywhere. It was at that moment that the woman realized she had nothing left to gain there. The only thing left for her to do was run away. But getting out of that chicken coop was no easy task. Firstly, because the only way back to the gate was blocked by the angry roosters. Secondly, because she was already destabilized, trying to get rid of Rodrigo, who had now entwined himself in the strands of her hair like a living angry wig. That's when she made the worst possible decision. Instead of trying to leave calmly, which probably wouldn't have worked anyway, she jumped up and tried to run. Bad choice. The first step she took was straight into a pile of chicken manure. The second step? Well, that never happened, because she slipped and ended up flat on her ass. I swear to all that is holy that the noise she made when she fell was just like a sack of potatoes being thrown to the ground. Only, unlike the potatoes, she was screaming like a pig being abducted. And, as if things weren't bad enough for her already, Rodrigo finally decided to let go of her hair. Or rather, he let go because he was stunned when she fell to the ground. He flew through the air as if he'd been thrown out of a rodeo, landing on top of the paddock with impeccable dignity. The woman, on the other hand, had no dignity left to salvage. Sitting there, all smeared with egg, manure, and feathers, she finally looked up and saw me. Yes, I was there the whole time, leaning on the barn door, with my arms crossed and a little smile on my face. If I'd known you liked chickens so much, I'd have asked you to look after them first, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. The woman widened her eyes, still unable to believe that she had been caught red-handed. But there was no escape. I had seen everything. She knew it. The cocks knew it. And her smell gave it away too. And now it was going to get even worse for her. Because if she thought the roosters were her biggest problem, she'd just wait until I called the police. If there was any doubt that this woman didn't have a shred of dignity left, she eliminated any chance of recovery when she tried to stand up. First attempt, handstand, forward momentum, and that was it. She slipped again, this time sinking a little deeper into the mud and manure. Second attempt, an exasperated grunt, a quick glance to the side to make sure no one was laughing, and it was off again. This time, one of the roosters even had the audacity to jump on her shoulder, as if analyzing the ridiculous creature that had invaded his territory. I have to confess that it was hard to keep from laughing. Very difficult. But my patience had its limits, and now that I had seen with my own eyes HOA Karen sticking her hand in my free-range eggs as if she owned the farm, it was time to settle this mess once and for all. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and, still leaning against the barn door, dialed the police. "Look, I need an officer here on my farm," I began, making sure my voice sounded as calm as possible, even though I was dying to laugh. "Someone has broken into my property and tried to steal my eggs." Upon hearing this, the woman finally managed to stand up, but it wasn't a dignified victory. It was a clumsy stumble, a disastrous slide, and a flailing of her arms as if she were trying to swim through the air to regain her balance. When he finally stood up, he looked like a scarecrow that had just survived a tornado. "You can't turn me in," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger in my direction, as if I were the criminal in the story. "Ah, but I could. I would." "Oh, yes, I could," I replied, giving her a smile as sweet as poison. And to my delight, the police attendant seemed to be enjoying herself as much as I was. "Sir, is the trespasser still on your property?" "Yes, but it seems that nature is solving much of the problem for me." The attendant laughed. I heard the muffled giggle on the other end of the line. Meanwhile, the woman was trying to reason with herself. "Minus I was just protecting the community. You sell these eggs without regulation." I looked around, surveying the damage. Broken eggs everywhere, feathers flying, the smell of shame hanging in the air. And do HOA regulations say that you can go onto someone else's property and get lynched by roosters? She opened her mouth. It closed. She opened it again. She looked like a fish out of water trying to form a coherent sentence. Finally, she found her last line of defense. You're overreacting. You don't need to call the police. Translation. I fucked up, and now I'm desperate. Ah, but my dear, the police were already on their way, and I was going to savor every second of it. The time it took for the police to arrive was short, but long enough for this woman to lose any shred of sanity she had left. First, she tried to escape. She tried to open the barn gate, but the latch was jammed. Point for me. Then she tried to convince me that it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe we can solve this another way? How, exactly? Do you want to pay for the eggs you destroyed? She grimaced as if she'd swallowed a frog whole. Maybe not like that. And then, in a stroke of desperation, he tried to blame the roosters. Look, your roosters are dangerous. They attacked me. They should be removed. Oh, of course. It makes perfect sense. You invade their property, try to steal their things, and they're the problem? She huffed, crossing her arms like a spoiled child who realized that the toy she wanted wasn't hers. And it was at that moment that the blue and white car pulled into the dirt road. The two policemen got out of the car with expressions of pure boredom. You could see that they had already dealt with a lot of stupidity that day. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for the sight of the woman completely dirty, with mud, egg, and feathers, standing in the middle of the henhouse as if she had stepped out of a rural horror reality show. One of the policemen looked at me. "Sir, did you call it in?" "It was me. This woman broke into my property, went into my henhouse, and tried to steal my eggs." The two officers turned to the woman. She crossed her arms and tried to look imposing, but the smell of manure definitely undermined her credibility. "This is a misunderstanding," she tried. "I only came in to see if the eggs were being produced to HOA standards." One of the policemen, a middle-aged man who looked like he no longer had the patience for this kind of nonsense, let out an exhausted sigh. "Ma'am, you live on private property that is not part of the HOA. Do you have any plausible justification for being in his chicken coop without permission?" She blinked. She looked away. It seemed that her brain was trying to process logical reasoning, which was quite a challenge for her, until, finally, she let out the most absurd sentence in the whole situation. "But it's only eggs! Oh, wonderful!" Now she wanted to act as if she hadn't done anything, but the police were already taking down the information. If there was a prize for the biggest prick in the universe, this woman had already secured the gold cup at that moment. There she was, dirty, smelly, covered in feathers and manure, trying to convince two policemen that stealing eggs was no big deal. But me? Ah, I knew that was going to make one of my best stories. The older policeman scratched his forehead, clearly wondering why on earth he had chosen this career instead of opening a bar on the beach. "Ma'am," he said, in that voice of someone who can't take any more idiocy, "trespassing is a crime." "But they're just eggs," she insisted, already a little desperate. The other policeman, younger and still with the remnants of patience in his soul, raised an eyebrow. "Right. What if I came into your house, took your TV, and walked out, but said, 'It's just a TV'? Would that be okay with you?" She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. The classic fish out of water, trying to breathe in an ocean of stupidity. Until, finally, she found her final card. I only entered because I was concerned about the community's sanitary standards. The community has no authority over this property, ma'am. And even if it did, do you think sneaking into a chicken coop and being attacked by roosters is the right way to monitor something? She took a deep breath, trying to muster up what shreds of dignity she still had. But there was nothing left, just feathers, eggs, and the unmistakable smell of someone who has messed up where they shouldn't have. While the police were checking the information and talking on the radio, the neighbors began to approach. Yes, the neighbors. And this is where the humiliation really began. Because this woman loved to play the superior to everyone. She would send notices about half-bent fences, threaten to fine anyone who let their grass grow half a centimeter longer than allowed, and once went so far as to try to ban a neighbor from hanging clothes on the clothesline. Very rural. The community needs to maintain an elegant visual standard. Well, now she was there, more rural than any of us. The first neighbor to appear was Donna Margaret, an old lady who had been tormented by the woman countless times. She looked at the scene, blinked a few times, and let out a muffled laugh. Then came Mr. Thompson, the mechanic, who took his cell phone out of his pocket without even disguising that he was recording. Soon, 2, 3, 5 more neighbors were there. And then someone started clapping slowly. And, as a cherry on top of this humiliation pie, one of my cocks, the glorious Rodrigo, gave her a sharp peck on the ass. He deserved it. Very well, ma'am, said the older policeman, closing his notebook. Here's the situation. The owner of the property can file formal charges against you for trespassing and theft. And considering the evidence, it's going to be hard for you to get away with it. The woman's eyes widened. You can't do this to me, she squealed, almost foaming with rage. I'm a respected member. That's when I cut her off. Of the organization that has no authority here? I added, smiling. She shivered. I could see that her brain was trying to find a miraculous way out, but all she could find were walls, or rather, fences. Fences that separated her from the dignity she had lost the moment she decided to defy 5 roosters and the neighborhood's patience. The policeman looked at me. Do you wish to make a formal complaint? Ah, the golden question. I thought for a moment, savoring the possibilities. I could take her straight to court. I could make her pay every penny of the eggs she destroyed. But you know what? I wanted something better. I wanted to see her suffer in the way I hated most. So I took a deep breath, looked at her, knowing that I had already won this war, and smiled. I'll drop the charges if she makes a public apology, acknowledging that she tried to steal my eggs and that she was chased away by angry roosters. The reaction was immediate. She paled. The neighbors laughed, and the policeman, one of whom even coughed to hide a smile. Are you sure? Asked the younger policeman. Absolutely, because if there was one thing this woman hated more than being contradicted, it was being publicly humiliated. She shook her head frantically. I will never do that. Fine. Then we'll take you to the police station. You're trespassing. You're trespassing. Do you want to go in the squad car or apologize now? The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a bread knife. But in the end, desperation won out. The woman took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and finally admitted it. I tried to steal the eggs. Louder, please, shouted someone from the neighborhood. She trembled, clearly fighting every fiber of her being. But she had no choice. So, with her head down, she admitted to the whole neighborhood that she had broken into my barn, that she had tried to steal my eggs, and that she had been chased away by angry roosters. And it was at that moment, as I watched the scene, that I realized nothing in life could ever top that moment. In the end, she disappeared off the map. She tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but it was too late. The story spread like wildfire through dry straw. The neighbors never respected her again. Rodrigo became a living legend. And what about me? Well, every time someone asks for Kaipira eggs, I tell them this story and give them a special discount. After all, these eggs aren't just organic. They are defended with honor. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment.